Okay, so my pick for this week is a bit strange, so you might have to bear with me, but it's Lights Out, which came out a few years ago, and I actually think this is quite a decent film. It's very, very scary, and it's well directed by David Sandberg, who I really love. He's did a bunch of other short horror movies, and horror movies in general, and he did Shazam as well. This concept is just inherently really good, and it gets under your skin. It's about this monster who can only exist in darkness, so every time you turn on a light, they've got to scamper away and you can't see them. You can only see them their silhouette when it's dark. So you get these excellent spooky scenes where you have characters flicking on and off light switches where this monster is appearing from the darkness and it's getting closer and closer. And it's so good. And the movie itself is made up of a lot of different sequences like that really work. But it makes one cardinal sin, in that it explains what the monster actually is. It has this whole subplot dedicated to figuring out, what the monster's called, why it is the way it is, and kind of even giving it a sort of sympathetic, weird edge that you just don't need. For me, that's the cardinal sin of all modern Hollywood blockbusters. You don't need to explain the monster. You can allow it to just, be unexplainable. That's why it's so scary in the first place. And once you give it a name and a reason to exist, it just sucks something out of it for me. And apparently, this was down to studio interference, who wanted more explanation in the script and more of a plot there about this monster, which for my money comes at odds with, like I said, the actual movie. So I don't want this movie remade by anyone else. I actually want David Sandberg to come back, but I don't want him to have to focus on this story. I want that ripping out entirely and just having it be 90 minutes of spooky, scary scares in the dark with this figure popping out of you and being an absolute terror, because that would be awesome. You don't need to explain it, and you shouldn't. You should get that out of the script, remake it, make it even more brutal, and then have the scariest film ever made. Because I actually saw the short movie, again directed by David Sandberg, before this came out, and it's what made me excited for it. And that's something else. I used to show that at every single house party I ever went to, because I wanted to horrify my friends, and I'm just terrible at parties, I guess. But I loved that so much, and I wanted a full feature-length film of it. And I kind of got it, but it could be so much better, and you don't even need to change much.
Right, so for a bad horror movie that I think needs remaking, in recent years it would have to be Polaroid. I think it's recently come to Netflix, so you can watch it on there. But it's just essentially a film that everybody's seen. It's the Hollywood version of horror that you've seen 500 times before, so it doesn't actually do anything new. And it's about this haunted Polaroid camera that these teenagers find out and start using, taking pictures. Whoa, fun time. But it is not, because of the haunted supernatural entity in there that starts to kill people and affect them through these images. And it also comes with the interesting caveat of whoever's image is in these Polaroid pictures, if you affect the image, then you affect the person as well. So like one's set on fire and it sets the people on fire as well. And one is like torn in half and ends up getting torn, all that sort of thing. There's loads of really cool ideas in there, but they are wrapped up in this Hollywood glossy sheen of a shell. And it's just infuriating because you can see all the seeds of creativity and originality that are in there. I think it suffers from the same affliction as Lights Out, which was an incredible short that then went to Hollywood. It isn't necessarily a bad film, but it's just a Hollywoodization of what was an incredible short, and that's what happened with this one. Lars Klevberg, the director of Polaroid, originally did Polaroid, the short Norwegian film, that just felt like it had loads more heart and spooky entity stuff about it, and there was no explanation. It was all atmosphere and very moody, and nothing was really given to you in the same way that it was with this film, which is the feature film is just twist after twist after twist that you're trying to keep up with, and it just isn't great. It's not a great movie. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to everyone involved. But it is a great idea, and I think a remake of it, where they take all of those interesting creative seeds that they planted and water them into something new and original, it would be amazing. You keep Lars Klevberg along, keep the director along, and just give him another chance at making something new. Like I said, this was stuck in development hell for ages. I think it was 2 years from the liquidation of one production company, and it got shifted around so it couldn't get distribution. And I feel like that always says everything about a film if it's had the development hell treatment. But yeah, get one that gets mainlined, sorted out properly, the script tightened up into something new, because again, the stuff's there to do it with. I'd like to see a new Polaroid. I'd like to see one where they've taken all the fun stuff and made it into an actual interesting new kind of movie. So yeah, Polaroid.
Now, I don't know what order they're going to go out, but I have also done one for this channel on how I'm constantly obsessed and disappointed by monster movies, because monster movies should be a subsection of horror, but they're just a subsection of action because nobody knows how to put them together, because Hollywood doesn't know how to make big monsters scary, they just know how to make them go stomp, stomp, pew, pew, etc, etc. Anyway, Gants on Netflix was this animated Japanese movie that looked, when I saw the trailer, like it had done monsters properly. All the creature design was really scary, it looked very interesting, it presented this really cool world, and it is supposed to be at its heart a horror film as much as anything else. I'm like, here we go, good, a horror monster movie, just what I've always wanted. And then I watched it, and it's not about horror, and it's not really about monsters, it's not really about anything other than how much breasts can jiggle under certain items of clothing. Like, genuinely, it was a stop the tape moment when the first woman came on screen, because I was like, oh, they're gonna be a thing during all this. Anyway, I digress. The film is a complete mess, and you don't really get a handle on what's going on in the story. You don't really understand anything about the characters. It's just completely all over the place, and there's this loose idea running underneath it, but you don't really get a taste for it too much. And I was like, well, that was terrible. But afterwards, I was kind of curious about what I was supposed to have watched. So I went up and read about the film and all this, and it turns out there's this huge world of lore behind the Gants franchise. It comes from this massive Japanese manga. It's been around for ages. There are loads of other films, there's loads of stuff written about it, and the story behind it is incredibly compelling. Yet when they went for this like new audience penetration movie that was going to bring in all these new fans, they just skipped over all the really interesting stuff and instead decided to focus on the massive wobbling breasts. So if I was going to remake a horror film, which this apparently is, I would remake this. And I would remake it in a way where the actual lore makes sense and the story makes sense, and that's what you're presented with, rather than... That's what I would do. That's just me. Give me $1 million. I'll do that.
This is a subject very dear to my heart, because there's lots of bad horror movies that deserve to be remade. The one that really gets to me in particular is Cursed, which might not be on a lot of people's radars, and that's because it was terrible. Let's be honest. It was Wes Craven's werewolf movie that came out in 2004, but which was actually supposed to come out long before that, because it went through production hell, which is one of the big problems with it and why it deserved to be remade. So it stars Christina Ricci and Jesse Eisenberg, as well as Joshua Jackson, the Dawson's Creek alumni, and it's a mess. The story of the production is actually way more interesting than the actual film, even though the film has some good ideas. It's sort of like if a vampire film, like a traditional vampire film where like you're being stalked by the vampire and people are turned and you have to try and find out who the main vampire is so that everybody can be freed from it, and it's all quite seductive and everyone falls in love, but it's in high school. It's quite it's a little bit Buffy, let's be honest, but with werewolves instead of vampires, and that is a pretty good concept, and it partly needs to be remade because people just don't make werewolf films anymore, and they deserve to. There's always been a big obsession with zombies and vampires, but werewolves sort of fell by the wayside, partly because of things like The Wolfman, which were just plain terrible. But Cursed had the potential. It had Wes Craven, it had Rick Baker, the special effects and makeup legend, of course, but then it also had the most problematic man in Harvey Weinstein. Let's not talk about him too much, but he was the reason why Cursed was destroyed, because he insisted on several rewrites, a production that ended up lasting 2 years longer than it was supposed to because of these rewrites and like changes to the plot and a desire to have it as a PG-13 despite the fact that it's a horror and it was a body horror and it was supposed to be really gory. And then he fired Rick Baker and replaced all of his presumably genius work, because the guy's a genius, with special effects stuff, which is terrible. And the result is as much of a mess as the production story makes it sound. It's got no charisma, it's sort of muddled in its head, and even though you like want it to be good because of who made it and who's in it, but it's like under 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. You can see that while you're watching the film. And if somebody came along, took the original script, and like you sort of have to go back in time in order for this to be possible, but still, and took what it was supposed to be, Wes Craven's vision for it, it could be a good film. It just needs to not be muddled with as much as it was.